The rope had stopped hurting an hour ago. That was how Wren Ashby knew it was bad. When the body gives up on pain, it has started giving up on other things too. She stood at the edge of the world, wind off the ridge, a drop below her bare feet so deep the bottom had no color at all. Behind her, 100 wolves held their breath. Not one of them looked at her. They had eaten her bread, worn the cloaks her hands had mended, and now they studied the snow like it had become very interesting. Her sister wore their mother's silver chain, wore it on purpose, where Wren could see it. A voice spoke the word witch, and the crowd leaned in, hungry. And here is the strange part, the part nobody warned her about. She was not thinking about the fall. She was thinking about a whisper, years old. Her mother's cracked lips against her ear. The night the fever took her. The old blood remembers you, little one. When they throw you away, look down. A hand pressed flat against her spine, almost gentle. Then it pushed, and as the cliff tore upward past her and the sky flipped white, something far below opened its eyes and waited. Snow fell over the ridge like ash from a fire no one could see. Wren Ashby walked through it barefoot. She had been walking since long before dawn. The pack had marched her up the mountain in a single silent line, and the rope at her wrists had frozen into the skin until she could no longer tell where the rope ended and where her own body began. She could smell pine sap on the cloaks of the men around her. She could smell iron, her own blood cracked open along the wrist, and under all of it, something worse. The smell of a crowd that has already made up its mind. 100 wolves had climbed this mountain to watch a girl die, and every single one of them had told themselves a quiet story about why it was just. Wren kept her chin lifted. It was the only thing left that still belonged to her, that small, foolish lift of the jaw. And she held on to it the way a drowning child holds a piece of driftwood in a black river. Do not let them see you break. Do not let them see you break. The words turned over and over inside her, worn smooth from use. At the edge of the cliff stood Drake Vale. 7 winters she had called him hers. 7 winters of believing the warmth in his eyes had been meant for her, and only her. He wore the white furs of an alpha now, and the wind seemed to bend around him on purpose, the way the whole world had always seemed to bend around Drake. Beside him stood her sister, not by blood, by the cruel accident of 2 families stitched together by debt. Cora wore a gown the color of fresh cream, and at her throat hung a thin silver chain with a small moon resting at the end of it. Wren knew that chain. She had worn it against her skin every day since the night her mother died. Her mother had pressed it into her palm with shaking fingers and made her swear never to lose it. Cora wore it like a trophy. She wore it exactly where Wren could not help but see, and she smiled. Wren Ashby. Drake's voice carried over the wind, and the wind seemed to carry it for him. You stand accused of poisoning the cup, of witchcraft against the bloodline, of speaking with rogues beneath the harvest moon. Lies, every word. She opened her mouth to say so, and tasted only blood. The pack has spoken, Drake went on. The cliff will speak next. A murmur moved through the gathered wolves, like wind through a field of dead wheat. Not one of them would meet her eyes. Not the women whose fevers she had broken with her herbs through the long cold nights. Not the children she had carried on her hip when their mothers were too tired to lift them. Not the old fighter whose rotting wound she had sat beside for 3 nights running, changing the poultice, humming low so he could finally sleep. They had all become one creature this morning. One hungry face, and the face wanted her gone. Drake stepped close enough that she could see the satisfaction sitting wet behind his eyes, close enough that she could see Cora's small, pleased smile over his shoulder. "You were never enough," he said softly, so softly, for her alone. "Only ever a placeholder, a debt my father owed yours. Cora is my fated mate, Ren. She always was. You were only ever something to fill the years. There is a particular kind of cruelty in being told you were never loved by the very person who let you believe you were." He had not simply betrayed her. He had spent 7 years teaching her to mistake his tolerance for tenderness. A little warmth, then cold. A kind word, then nothing for weeks. Over and over until she clung to the warmth all the harder, precisely because she never knew when it would come again. That was the thing that would take her longest to survive. Not the cliff, not the cold, the training. The silver chain caught the gray light at Cora's throat, and Ren thought, with a clarity so sharp it almost felt like peace, "That is what I will remember." Not his face, not the cold, the chain. Drake's hand settled at the small of her back, almost tender, almost like the boy who had once brought her wildflowers in his cupped hands and promised her a garden someday. Then he pushed. The world tilted. The wind tore the scream out of her throat before she could shape it into anything at all. The cliff face rushed past in a gray blur of frost and stone, and somewhere far above her, Cora was laughing. And her mother's voice rose up out of the dark of memory, one final time. "The old blood remembers you, little one. When they throw you away, look down." She had never understood those words. She did not understand them now. She only fell. Snow, stone, sky, snow. And then, through the howling rush of air, through the roar of her own blood in her ears, something woke inside her chest. Her wolf, the small, starved thing she had never once been allowed to name in all her 22 years of living. It lifted its head for the first time in 7 years. And it did not whine in fear. It whined in recognition. Something below was waiting. Something enormous. The shadows at the base of the cliff parted in the falling light. Her body twisted in the air, and through the white blur she saw, not the jagged rocks she had been promised, not the death the whole pack had gathered to witness, but a shape. A vast, dark, impossible shape, standing very still in the deep snow. Its face turned up toward her, the way a man watches a star that is falling, and somehow choosing him to fall toward. 2 eyes opened in the dark, molten silver, older than the pack, older than the cliff, older perhaps than the mountain that held them all. Her wolf, inside her ribs, began to sing, and then she struck something, not stone, something warm, something solid, something alive. The impact did not break her. Arms closed around her like the ceiling of a vault swinging shut, sealing out the wind, sealing out the cold, sealing out the whole world that had wanted her dead. A heartbeat thundered once against her side, slow. Enormous, ancient. A scent rose around her then, and her starved wolf drank it in like cold water after years of thirst. Cedar, snowmelt, and beneath that, something dark and male and faintly electric, like the charged air just before lightning splits the sky. She had never smelled anything like it in her life. And yet some buried part of her knew it, the way a child knows its mother's name long before it can speak. A voice spoke into her hair, low as thunder moving underground. I have you, a breath, warm against her temple. I have you, little moon. I have been waiting a very long time. And Wren Ashby, condemned that morning as a witch, fainted in the arms of a stranger her starved wolf somehow already trusted. He stood in the snow with the girl held against his chest, and he did not move. He had counted the days. He would not say it aloud, not yet, not to her. But Cain Thorne had counted every one of them at the foot of this cliff, since the night the bond first woke beneath his ribs and turned him north like a needle finding true. 112 dawns. 112 mornings. Of standing in the dark, half blind with it, listening to something inside his own chest strain toward a throat he had never once seen. And now, she was here, small, frozen through, bleeding at the wrist. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, which seemed impossible, given how much fury he could feel still burning in her, even unconscious. He looked down at her face. He had imagined it wrong, all those long mornings. He had pictured someone untouched, someone whole. This was better. This was true. Far above them, on the lip of the cliff, the laughter stopped. He felt it stop. Felt the exact moment the crowd up there understood that the body they had thrown away had not struck the ground. Let them wonder, he thought. Let them lie awake tonight, and every night after. His arms tightened, careful, so careful, around the girl whose scent his wolf had known before either of them had drawn their first breath in this world. You will never fall again, he said. Quiet, only for her. Not while I am the thing standing underneath you. And he turned and carried her down into the mountain. She woke to warmth, and that alone was so strange that for one long blurred moment, she was certain she had died. The Black Ridge Hall had always been cold. Even in the deep of summer, the stones wept damp, and Wren had learned over 7 years to sleep curled into the smallest shape a body could fold into. Knees drawn to her chest, hands tucked beneath her own arms, hoarding whatever scrap of heat she could make for herself. She had not woken warm in 7 years. Now she was warm everywhere. She lay very still beneath a weight of furs that smelled of cedar and snowmelt, and that other thing underneath. Something dark and male and faintly electric, like the air before a storm. Her wrists had been bandaged. Her feet, when she flexed them carefully beneath the blankets, were wrapped in soft linen. And they did not hurt. Someone had washed the blood from her face. Someone had combed the snow and the snarls out of her hair, slow and patient, the way you tend to something you mean to keep. Her wolf stretched inside her chest, slow, luxurious, the way a creature stretches when it has finally come home. Wren opened her eyes. The chamber was carved from black stone, but the stone glowed, faintly, threaded all through with veins of something silver that pulsed, slow and even, in time with a heartbeat that was not her own. A fire burned in a hearth as tall as a standing man. The ceiling climbed up and vanished into shadow. There were no windows anywhere. There was no door that she could find. She was deep underground. She understood it the way you understand things in a dream, without being told, without needing to be. The old blood will come, her mother had whispered, on the last night of her life. Wren sat up slowly. The furs slid down, and she found that she had been dressed in a long shift of soft gray wool. The shift was new. The stitching was fine and close and careful. Someone had made it. For her, or for a woman built exactly to her size. And the thought sent a strange shiver crawling up the back of her neck that was not, she realized, entirely fear. You should not be sitting up yet. The voice came out of the shadows beside the hearth, and her whole body went still, the way a rabbit goes still in the long grass when the shadow of the hawk slides over it. He stepped into the firelight. He was enormous. That was the first thing. The sheer architectural fact of him, the breadth of his shoulders, a height that made the great chamber feel suddenly low. He wore black leather, dark fur banding the collar, a heavy cloak shoved back over one shoulder. His hair was the color of wet slate, and it fell loose past his jaw. His face was not handsome, the way Drake had been handsome. Drake had been polished bone, and a smile he aimed like a weapon. This face was something older, a blade left out too long in the weather, a mountain seen from very far away, that does not care whether you are looking. And his eyes were the molten silver she remembered from the falling. Where? Her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. Where am I? Beneath the world, he said. Beneath your cliff, beneath the bones of the mountain, your pack believes that it owns. He came a step closer, slow. The way a man crosses the last of the distance toward a wounded thing he does not want to startle. You are in the hollow. My court. Court. The word landed wrong in her ears. Packs did not have courts. Packs had alphas and lunas and feast halls that reeked of spilled beer and wet dog. Who are you? She whispered. He stopped at the foot of the bed. He did not touch her. He did not need to. His presence pressed against her bare skin like the heat off a forge from across a room. Cane Thorn, he said, and then lower, almost reluctant, as though the next word cost him something simply to let it out into the air. The pack tongue calls my line lichen. The world tilted for the second time in a single day. Lichen, not wolf, not shifter, lichen. The thing whispered into cradle songs to make the children behave. The first blood, the old blood. The kings who had ruled long before there were any other kings to speak of. The pack had taught her they were extinct. The pack had taught her they were nothing more than a story. A thing told to keep the young ones from wandering past the tree line after the sun went down. The pack, it was beginning to seem, had taught her a great many things that simply were not true. I fell, she said stupidly. From the cliff, Drake pushed me. I should be dead. Yes. His silver eyes did not leave her face. You should be. Then why am I not? A long silence. The fire popped. The silver veins in the walls pulsed once, slow and gentle, like a vast lung drawing a single patient breath. Because I caught you, he said. And then, quieter, the truth that lived underneath that truth. because I have stood at the foot of that cliff every dawn for 112 days, waiting. His jaw tightened. Something that was very close to pain moved across the weathered planes of his face. Because the day you came into this world, little moon, the bond in my chest woke up. And I have walked half blind through every season since, hunting for the one throat it was reaching toward. Now here is the exact moment this whole story could quietly turn into a lie. So it is worth slowing down for. A destined bond is a beautiful fantasy. But out in the real world, past the firelight and the silver eyes, no one is owed another person's love simply because they have waited a long, aching time to receive it. Waiting does not earn a heart. Longing gives you no claim on anyone. What makes Cane Thorne different from Drake Vale is not the bond they share. It is not fate. It is the very next thing that comes out of his mouth. So listen for it. Wren's hand rose, without her permission, to her own throat. Mate, she breathed. Cane Thorne, Lycan King, lowered himself down to one knee at the side of her bed. Slow, heavy, like a man setting down a sword he has carried for far too long. Mate, he said, if you will have me. A pause. He let it sit. And if you will not, then guest, and ward, and avenged. Whichever you choose, Wren Ashby, you will never fall again. There it was. He offered her the door before he ever offered her himself. That is not fate. Fate hands you nothing to decide. That is respect. And respect, unlike destiny, is not a thing that simply happens to a person once and is finished. It is a thing chosen. Again, and again, and again. Every single morning, a man wakes up. Wren stared at him, at the king kneeling on the cold stone, at the silver eyes that held no demand inside them, at the great rough hand resting open on his knee, palm turned up to the firelight, in case she wished to take it, and in case she did not. And every old instinct buried in her body screamed at her that this, right here, was the most dangerous moment of them all. She did not sleep that night. She fled. It was not a decision so much as a reflex, the thing a starved animal does the instant the cage door is left standing open, even by a gentle hand, especially by a gentle hand. Because Wren had spent 7 long years learning that warmth was the bait, that gentleness was the soft thing they set down right before they sprung the snare. Drake had been gentle. Once, Drake had brought her wildflowers cupped in his 2 hands, and he had smiled at her like she was the only girl on the mountain. And then Drake had pushed her off a cliff in front of a cheering crowd. So when Cane Thorne rose and bowed his great dark head at the threshold of her chamber and told her softly to rest, "The door is not locked, little moon. It never will be." She waited. She waited until the silver veins in the walls had dimmed to their slowest, sleeping pulse. And then she got up. Her bandaged feet made no sound on the black stone. Her wolf was screaming at her not to do this, clawing at the inside of her ribs. No, no. He is ours. He is the one. Stay. Please, stay. And Wren set her teeth against the sound and kept walking. Her wolf had been wrong before. Her wolf had liked Drake too, in the beginning. Her wolf was a starved fool that had never once been let out into open air, and it could not be trusted to tell the difference between a king and a butcher. The hollow was a labyrinth. Corridors bled into corridors. Stairs spiraled up into dark and down into deeper dark. She passed chambers hung with strange weapons, long curved blades, spears tipped with something pale that looked like polished bone. She passed an archway, and through it she could hear, faint and low, the voices of men speaking a language she did not know. Rolling, heavy with hard consonants. The old tongue, the language her own had been chipped out of, and then forgotten. And no one stopped her. That, more than anything in that place, frightened her. No one stopped her. The Lycan King's Court let a barefoot girl in a gray shift walk straight past their guard rooms, their armories, their silent council halls. And not one warrior among them lifted a hand, as though they had all been told, as though the word had come down from the throne itself, and traveled ahead of her through every black corridor. Let her go where she will. Let her see all of it. Let her choose. It only made her more certain that it was a trap. She found a stairway that climbed, and she climbed it. She climbed until her bandaged feet wept fresh blood through the linen, until her thighs shook beneath her, until the air thinned and chilled and began to carry, faint and then sharp, the smell of snow, of pine. The surface. She was reaching the surface. There was a door at the top of the stair, black iron, no lock anywhere on it. And Wren set her shoulder against it and shoved with the very last of her strength. It swung open. She stepped out into a small hidden grotto on the mountain's flank, half drowned in snowdrift. The gray dawn light was only just beginning to bloom along the ridge. The blizzard had broken sometime in the night. The world was very still, very white, very quiet. And that was her mistake. She had been so fixed on the escaping that she had never once stopped to ask the only question that actually mattered in the end. Escape to where? Her pack had thrown her off a cliff. Her pack would do it again, and the second time they would make certain of the work. There was no village within a day's hard walk that did not pay its tithe to Blackridge. There was no road she could follow that Drake's trackers had not already mapped in their sleep. She had just walked out of the only place in the whole wide world that had ever, in her entire starved life, kept her warm. If you have ever watched someone you love run from the good thing that has finally found them, then this is the reason why. The ones who study such things have a name for it. They call it hypervigilance in safety. A nervous system shaped by years of danger cannot simply switch itself off the moment the danger ends. Safety feels like the held breath before the next blow lands. Warmth feels like bait laid carefully over a trap. Wren was not being ungrateful. Wren was being accurate. Accurate to every single lesson her life had bothered to teach her so far. And here is the thing worth carrying out of this story. Healing is not the moment you finally reach safety. Healing is the long, graceless, humbling work of teaching your own body, one slow day at a time, that the safety is allowed to last. Wren sank down to her knees in the snow. The cold drove straight through the thin wool. Her wolf had stopped its screaming now. It was only weeping, a thin animal grief, the sound a child makes when she has hurt herself badly and does not know how to take it back. Wren pressed her bandaged hands over her face. "I am sorry," she whispered, to no one at all in the empty white morning. "I am sorry. I do not know how to be wanted. I never learned how. I do not know how to do it." A twig snapped behind her, somewhere in the trees. Her head came up. 3 figures stood at the edge of the grotto. Blackridge cloaks, Blackridge crests stitched at the shoulder, Drake's scouts, sent up the mountain, surely, to confirm that the witch was truly dead, and that the cliff had finished what it had been given. Their eyes found her. Their faces went slack with disbelief, and then sharpened, fast, into something like delight. "Well," said the one in front, drawing a long knife with a slow and spreading grin. "Well, well, well. Look what came crawling back up the rocks." Wren did not have the strength left in her body to run. Her wolf lifted its small, bloodied head inside her chest, and it howled. Not for itself. It howled for the king it had just turned its back on, the warmth it had just fled, the one good thing it had recognized before her frightened mind would let her believe in it. And far below, in the warm and waiting dark of the mountain, something vast opened its silver eyes and began to climb. The first scout reached her before the howl had even faded from her ribs. His hand closed in her hair and yanked her up onto her knees, and Wren gasped at the sudden bright pain of it. The way her scalp tore, the way her neck snapped back, the knife came up to her throat. She felt the cold flat of the blade against her pulse, and she thought, with a strange and tired clarity, "So this is how it ends after all, only a few hours late." "Drake will want the head," said the second scout, almost bored about it, as if discussing a chore. "Proof the pack is still nervy after this morning." "Then I will take it off here," said the first. "Cleaner that way. No dragging her down the whole mountain." The third scout said nothing. The third scout was not looking at Wren at all. He was staring past her, into the trees beyond the grotto, and his face had gone the color of old milk left out too long. "Reeve," he said, very quietly. "Reeve, look." The first scout did not look. The first scout was a man named Reeve, who had hated Wren for years, because Cora had taught him to, who had once spat into her bowl at the long table and laughed when she ate the soup anyway, because hunger was hunger, and pride was a luxury the despised do not get to keep. He pressed the blade down harder. A bead of her blood welled up along the steel and slid, warm, down to her collarbone. "Reeve," said the third scout, and this time his voice cracked clean down the middle. "Reeve." The first scout finally looked up. The trees at the edge of the grotto were no longer empty. He stood between 2 pines, and the snow around his boots had melted away in a perfect dark circle, and steam was rising off his bare shoulders into the gray dawn air, as though the cold itself could not quite bring itself to touch him. Cane thorn, bare to the waist in the killing winter, no cloak, no weapon in his hands. He did not need either one. His silver eyes were fixed on the knife at Wren's throat, and he was not breathing. That was the thing she noticed in the long suspended second before the world tore open. He was not breathing. That vast chest had gone perfectly, unnaturally still, as though every animal function inside him had paused itself to make room for one enormous rising thing. Then he breathed in, and the grotto trembled. It was not a growl. A growl is a sound, a thing the throat makes. This was something else. This was weather. A low subsonic shudder that came up out of the mountain itself, that rattled the loose snow off the pine boughs in soft white falls, that made the first scout's knife hand begin to shake so badly The blade shattered against Wren's collarbone. Her own wolf, inside her chest, did not whine. Her wolf went perfectly still, the way small creatures go still in the presence of the very large. And then it bowed. Let her go. The voice was not the voice from the bedchamber. That voice had been low and tired and almost unbearably gentle. This voice was made of stone and old murder. It came up out of his chest, not his throat. Drop the knife, kneel, and I may let you keep your hands. The third scout dropped to his knees in the snow so fast that Wren heard both his kneecaps crack against the frozen ground. The second scout went down a heartbeat behind him. His knife clattered away from his open hand as though it had suddenly turned red hot. But the first scout, Reeve, Cora's man, he did not kneel. He laughed. It was a high, wrong sound. The laugh of a man who has decided the thing in front of him cannot possibly be real. Because if it is real, then he is already a dead man. And his mind will not let him hold that yet. You think I don't know what you are? He spat. You're a story. You're a cradle song. The lichens burned out of the world 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years. His blade pressed harder. A second thread of Wren's blood ran warm down her chest. I'll open her throat before you cross the clearing, story man. Cane Thorn crossed the clearing. Wren did not see him move. None of them saw him move. There was a sound like a great door slamming shut very far away underground. And then Cane was simply there, where empty air had been, and his enormous hand had closed around Reeve's wrist, and the knife was gone. Just gone. And Reeve was screaming, a high, thin, animal scream, because his wrist was bent now in a direction that wrists are not built to bend. Cane lifted him clean off the ground, one-handed, the way a man lifts a kitten by the loose skin of its neck. You set your steel against her throat, the Lichen King said, almost conversational now, almost soft. On my mountain. The pain broke something open in Reeve, and the words spilled out of him before he could stop them. The girl paid me, he gasped. Cora. Cora gave me the necklace. Bring her proof the witch was dead, she said, and the chain was mine to keep. That is all it was. That is all it ever was. I swear it. And his free hand scrabbled wild at his own belt, and came up clutching the proof of his own confession, something that flashed silver in the thin dawn light, a chain, a delicate silver chain, with a small moon swinging at the end of it, her mother's chain. The world stopped. Wren stared at the chain dangling from Reeve's twisting fist. At the small moon-shaped pendant she would have known in pitch dark by the feel of it alone. And she understood, all at once, the whole shape of it. Cora had pressed their dead mother's necklace into this man's hand as a token, as a wage, as a charm against failure. Bring me back proof you killed her, and you can keep the witch's pretty necklace. The chain her mother had folded into her palm with dying fingers. The chain that had meant the old blood will come for you, little one. The chain that, until this exact moment, had been a symbol of everything Wren had ever lost in this life. It hung now from the fist of the man who had just been pressing a knife to her pulse, and something inside Wren Ashby that had been bent for 7 years, quietly, finally, broke, not into pieces, into a shape, a new one, a harder one. She rose to her feet in the snow. Her bandaged feet did not hurt any more. She noticed that, distantly. The pain had gone somewhere else, somewhere she could not feel it. Her wolf was no longer weeping inside her. Her wolf was standing. "Cain," she said, and her voice did not shake. "The chain. Give me the chain." The Lycan King's silver eyes flicked sideways to her. He still held Reeve dangling in the air, the man's ruined wrist clamped in one fist. Something passed between them then. Something that did not need the bond, or the blood, or the old tongue to carry it. Something far simpler than any of that. "Yes," Cain said, and then, lower, like an oath. "My queen," he squeezed. Reeve's fingers sprang open with a wet, involuntary sound. The silver chain fell free into the cold air, and Ren caught it before it could touch the snow. Now, watch what has happened to a single small object across the length of one terrible morning. When Ren's mother pressed that chain into her hand, it was a promise. The old blood will come. When Cora stole it from a corpse that was not yet a corpse, it became a trophy. Proof that Ren could be erased and her things divided up like spoils. When Reeve carried it up the mountain in his fist, it became a transaction, a murder, paid for in silver. And now, in Ren's bleeding hand, it has become something else entirely. It has become evidence, not of magic, not of fate, but of the oldest human habit there is, the habit of pouring meaning into an object, and then making war over the meaning we ourselves invented. Every family has a chain like this, a ring, a watch, a name. And the story of who we finally become is so often the story of what we decide that one small thing is allowed to mean. Ren closed her fist around the little moon, and for the first time in 7 years, it did not feel like grief. It felt like a weapon she had just chosen not to use yet. Cain dropped Reeve into the snow. The man crumpled, cradling his shattered wrist against his chest, weeping in great, ugly gulps. The other 2 scouts stayed exactly where they had fallen, heads down, hands flat in the frost, not daring even to look up. Cain did not kill them. Ren had expected him to. Some cold, tired part of her had already braced for the sound of it. Instead, he said only, "The Hollow has questions for the 3 of you." And Ren understood, watching the blood drain out of Reeve's face, that this was, in its own quiet way, far worse than dying in the snow would have been. Cain turned to her, and the stone and the murder were gone out of his face now. What was left was the bedchamber voice, the little moon voice. "Can you walk?" he asked. Ren looked down at her bare feet, at the fresh blood threading through the linen, at the long climb back down into the dark. "Yes," she said, because she had always said yes. Because saying yes was how a girl survived in a place where her no had never once mattered. Cain looked at her feet too. And then he looked back up at her face, and something in his weathered expression went very gentle and very still. "You can," he agreed quietly. "I do not doubt that you can. You have been doing the thing you cannot do, alone, for a very long time." He crossed the snow to her, slow, telegraphing every movement, the way you do for a creature that has learned to flinch. "But you do not have to. Not today." He did not sweep her up. He stopped an arm's length away, and he waited, and he held out one great open hand, palm up, into the space between them. He let her be the one to close the distance, and that, more than the catching, more than the breaking of the man who had hurt her, more than the steam rising off his shoulders in the killing cold. That was the thing that undid her. Drake had never once waited. Drake had taken. Drake had decided. Drake had moved her through the world like a chair he was rearranging. This enormous, ancient, terrifying thing stood in the snow with his hand open and waited to see whether she would reach for it. Wren's wolf pressed up against the inside of her ribs, not screaming now, just leaning toward him, toward the warmth, toward the cedar and the snowmelt and the lightning smell of him. And slowly, slowly, Wren lifted her bleeding hand and laid it in his. His fingers closed around hers, so careful, as though her hand were made of something that had already been broken once and might not survive a second time. "There," he murmured. "There she is." He carried her after that, but only because she let him. She told him she could walk, and he looked at her, and he did not argue, and he did not insist. He only lifted one dark eyebrow and said, "I know. Let me have this anyway. It has been a hard morning for the both of us." And the both of us was so unexpected, so absurd, that a sound came out of her that she did not recognize. It took her a moment to understand that it had been a laugh, a small one, cracked and rusty from disuse, but a laugh. Cain went very still when he heard it, the way a man goes still when a wild bird lands closer than it ever has before, and he is afraid that breathing wrong will send it back into the trees. He said nothing about it. He simply gathered her up against his bare, warm chest, her mother's chain still clenched tight in her fist, and turned back toward the black iron door in the mountainside. Down they went, past the silver veins pulsing slow in the walls, past the armories and the silent halls. The two whole scouts shuffled ahead of them under guard, hands bound. Reeves stumbled behind, cradling his wrist, leaking quiet, broken sounds. And here is something worth saying plainly, before this part of the story goes any further. It would be easy to call this the moment Wren was saved. It was not. A man tearing apart the people who hurt you is not healing. It can feel like it for a moment. It can feel like justice, like air after drowning. But the broken wrist did not give Wren back her 7 years. The steam off Cain's shoulders did not teach her body how to sleep without curling into the smallest possible shape. What changed her in that grotto was something far quieter than violence. It was an open hand she was allowed to refuse. It was the word both. It was the discovery, brand new and terrifying, that someone could be enormous and dangerous and capable of snapping a man like dry kindling and still choose with her to wait. Power that waits to be invited is a different thing entirely from power that simply takes. Wren did not have the words for that yet, but her wolf did. Her wolf had known it the instant it caught his scent on the way down the cliff. Far above them now, the surface fell away, and as the black iron door swung shut behind them, sealing out the snow and the pale dawn and the weeping man in the frost, Wren turned her face into the warmth of Cain Thorne's shoulder, and she breathed him in. Cedar, snowmelt, lightning, and under it, threaded through it, something that her starved and standing wolf had no human word for at all. It smelled like a door that did not lock. It smelled like the long way back to herself. And somewhere up on the ridge, in a hall ringed by old oaks, a scout who had run the moment the steam rose off the king's shoulders was already racing home through the snow to tell Cora that the witch was not dead. that a monster had her, that something very old and very angry had come up out of the mountain and was coming for them next. Word ran ahead of them through the black corridors of the mountain. By the time Cain carried Ren into the great hall of the hollow, the old blood had already gathered. There were perhaps 200 of them. Ren had not known there were 200 lichens left anywhere in the world. She had not known there were 20. She had been raised on the certainty that they were ash and cradle song, a story to keep children from the dark. And now they lined the walls of a chamber so vast its ceiling climbed up and lost itself in shadow. And they were tall, all of them, tall the way Cain was tall, with the same weathered, ageless faces and the same molten eyes and colors she had no names for, some silver, like his, some the deep green of still lake water, some the pale gold of winter wheat just before it is cut. They wore furs and dark leather and rings of bone and antler. They did not speak. They only watched her, and her wolf inside her chest did not cower this time. Her wolf lifted its small head and looked right back at them. Cain set her down at the foot of a low dais. There was no throne on it. Ren noticed that even through the roaring in her ears. Only a single flat black stone, worn smooth by centuries of standing. Cain stepped up onto it the way a man steps onto ground he has known his whole life. Then he turned to face his court, one great hand resting very lightly at the small of her back, not gripping, not holding her in place, just there. A warmth she could lean away from if she wanted to. This, he said in the common tongue, so that she would understand every word, is Ren Ashby, the mate the bond promised me 112 days ago, the woman I have waited for since before any soul in this hall was whelped. His silver gaze moved across the gathered faces. Her own pack threw her from the Black Ridge cliff at dawn. Then they sent men up the mountain to be sure of her death. Those men found her at my door and set a knife to her throat on my ground. A sound moved through the gathered lichens, not a growl, not a gasp, something lower, older, more terrible than either. The sound of 200 ancient predators quietly marking a name and folding it away for later. Black Ridge. There will be a reckoning, Cain said, soft and certain. But not tonight. Tonight belongs to her. And then a voice answered him from the cold edge of the dais. Does it? It was not a question. It was a blade laid flat on a table for everyone to see. An old lichen stepped forward out of the watching crowd. Tall, even among the tall. His hair was iron gray. His eyes were the dull steel of a winter sky. And he carried himself like a creature who had stood in this hall long before Cain Thorne had ever knelt to anyone. Orin, Cain said, and the warmth went out of his voice. My king. Orin inclined his head. The courtesy was perfect. The contempt beneath it was perfect too. You carry a human girl into the heart of the hollow, bleeding, half dead, reeking of pack and of fear, and you ask 200 of the old blood to call her queen. His pale eyes traveled over Ren, slow, cataloging, the bandaged feet, the borrowed shift, the wild, half-combed hair. The bond can be mistaken, Orin said. It has been before. Longing is a clever liar, my king. A man left alone too long will hear a voice in an empty room and swear that it spoke his name. Ren felt the words land. She felt them the way she had felt every cold word for 7 years, in the gut, in the old soft place that had learned, long ago, to agree with whoever was hurting her, because agreeing made it stop sooner. "He is right," whispered the oldest voice in her. "You are nothing. You are pack scraps. You do not belong on a black stone in a hall full of kings." And the terrible thing, the thing that shamed her, was that some part of her was almost relieved to hear it. Because that voice, she knew, that voice was home. Beside her, Cain went very still. She felt the muscles in the hand at her back draw tight, felt the air in the great hall begin, faintly, to hum the way it had hummed in the grotto, just before the steam rose off his shoulders. He was going to defend her. He was going to roar, and the chamber would shake, and Oren would bow, and it would be the grotto all over again. The enormous thing rising up to stand between her and the danger. And some buried, starving, suddenly furious part of Wren Ashby did not want that. "Don't," she said it quietly, to Cain alone. But the hall had gone so silent that her quiet voice carried to every corner of it. His head turned. Surprise moved across the molten silver of his eyes, and beneath it, something that looked almost like fear. "Wren, you said tonight was mine." Her voice did not shake. She had discovered somewhere on the long climb down the mountain that it could hold steady now if she asked it to. "Then let it be mine." She stepped off the warmth of his hand. She stepped forward, alone, onto the cold black stone. Her bandaged feet left small red prints on the worn dark surface, and 200 ancient eyes followed every single one of them. She turned to face Oren. "You are right," she said. A ripple went through the hall. Oren's pale brows lifted just slightly. He had expected tears, perhaps, pleading, a girl ducking behind her king. He had not expected her to agree. "The bond means nothing to me," Wren went on. "I do not feel it the way the rest of you seem to. I was raised to believe your whole kind was a lie, told to frighten children into their beds. 3 days ago, I had never even heard the word for what you are." She lifted her chin. "So no, I will not stand on this stone and ask you to call me queen because something woke in his chest the day I was born. I did not earn that. I did not do that. He did, not me." The silence in the hall changed. It was not the silence of contempt anymore. It was the silence of 200 very old creatures leaning, very slightly, forward. Because something was happening here that none of them had seen coming. Oren's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you standing on the stone, girl?" Wren looked down at her own 2 hands, at the bandages, at the cracked and bitten nails, at the small white scars from 7 years of work that no one had ever once thanked her for. "Because these are not the hands of a queen," she said. "You are right about that too. These are the hands of a healer." She raised her eyes and swept the watching crowd with them. "And I would wager that in a hall this old, full of warriors this proud, there is someone here tonight who is hurt, and who has been far too proud to say so." She let that settle. "So do not give me a crown," she said. "Give me your sick, and then decide what I am." Nobody moved. And then, from the far shadowed edge of the chamber, there came a low, wet, rasping cough. Wren knew that cough. She had heard it 100 times in the dark of the Blackridge Hall. the kind that meant something had gone bad, deep in the chest, and was getting worse by the hour. Heads turned. A young lichen sat slumped against the far wall, younger than the rest, sweat shining on his gray face despite the cold of the stone. One arm bound clumsily across his ribs with a strip of stained leather. "That is Bram," someone murmured. "Took a blackthorn spear in the side. A moon passed. Hunting rogues along the southern line." "Blackthorn steel does not heal clean," said another, lower. "Not even in our blood. He has been rotting from the inside ever since. The healers gave him up days ago." And Oren said, with a quiet and deliberate cruelty, "You will not want that one, girl. 3 of our own have already failed him. He is dying. Choose yourself an easier patient, if you mean to keep your little crown." Ren was already crossing the floor. She knelt down beside the boy. Because he was a boy, really, beneath the gray sweat and the ancient eyes. No older, in the ways that mattered, than the children she had carried on her hip in the pack that had thrown her away. "Bram," she said softly, "my name is Ren. I am going to look at your side now. May I?" The boy's fevered eyes found her face, and he nodded. Because she had asked. Because no one, in a whole moon of slow dying, had thought to ask him anything at all. She unwound the filthy leather. The wound beneath it was a horror, black at the edges, swollen, tight, and shining. The blackthorn steel had left something of itself behind in the meat of him, and his body had been at war with that buried thing for a month, and it was losing the war. Ren had seen this before. Not lichen flesh, no, but rot was rot. And a body fighting a buried thing was a body fighting a buried thing. Whether the blood in its veins was 1,000 years old or only 22. "I need clean water," she said, not asking now, telling. "Boiled and let to cool. A blade held in the fire until it glows, then cooled clean. Honey, if the old blood keeps such a thing. And I need every last one of you to stop crowding the light." For one long heartbeat, no one moved. 200 ancient predators, waiting on the word of a barefoot girl in a borrowed shift. And then Kane's voice rolled out low across the hall. "You heard your healer. Move." What followed was not magic. That is worth saying plainly, because the story would like very much to pretend that it was, that she laid her hands on the dying boy, and light poured out of her palms, and the rot fled before it like shadow before a torch. That is not what happened. What happened was slow, and ugly, and patient, and entirely, stubbornly ordinary. She opened the wound. The boy screamed, and she did not flinch, and she did not stop. And she talked to him through all of it in a low, steady voice about nothing at all, the way you talk to a frightened animal until the screaming dropped away into ragged breathing. She found the splinter of blackthorn steel buried deep in the meat of him, and she drew it out. She cleaned the wound until her hands cramped into claws. She packed it with honey, because honey draws the rot, and a body remembers how to mend itself once the buried thing is finally gone. She bound it clean. She bound it tight. And then she sat beside him for hours, the way she had once sat 3 nights running beside an old warrior in a hall full of people who would later stand at a cliff's edge and watch her fall and say nothing. She changed the packing. She cooled his fever with the boiled water gone cold. She hummed, low and tuneless, the small song her mother used to hum, And somewhere in the deep, dark hours, the boy's breathing eased and slowed and steadied into the long rhythm of real sleep. By the time the silver veins in the walls began to brighten toward something that was not quite dawn, but meant the same thing, the gray was gone from Bram's face. Wren sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking now, the way they always shook after, when the work was finished and there was finally room in her body for everything she had been holding at bay. And slowly, she became aware that the great hall had not emptied. 200 lichens had stayed. All night, they had watched a human girl fight for the life of one of their own with boiled water and honey, and the plain, stubborn refusal to let a dying boy be alone in the dark. And not a single one of them had gone to their bed. Oren stood near the dais. His iron face gave nothing away. But when Wren's exhausted eyes found his, he did something that moved a low murmur through the whole watching hall. He inclined his head, not deeply, not in surrender, but the steel had gone out of his pale eyes, and what was left was the wary, grudging respect of a very old creature who has just watched someone do a hard thing, and do it well. "You did not heal him with the bond," Oren said. "No," Wren agreed. She was too tired now to be anything but honest. "I do not have the bond. I have honey and patience, and the memory of 100 nights doing this for people who hated me." A long pause. "That," Oren said slowly, "is worth more than the bond." And he turned and walked from the hall, and he did not bow any lower than the head. And somehow that small grudging tilt of an ancient neck was worth more than if he had thrown himself flat upon the stone. Cain found her there in the gray light, sitting beside the sleeping boy, her trembling hands folded in her lap. He lowered himself down to sit on the cold floor beside her, not touching, just there, enormous and quiet, and close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his skin in the chill. For a long while, neither of them said a word. "You could have let me defend you," he said at last. Quiet. There was no anger in it, only a kind of wonder, threaded through with something that ached. "I would have." The moment Oren opened his mouth, I wanted to bring the whole hall down around his ears. "I know," Wren said. "That is exactly why I stopped you." He turned his head to look at her. "For 7 years," she said slowly, finding the words as she went. "Someone bigger than me decided what I was. They decided when I ate. They decided whether I was worth the keeping. They decided, in the end, that I should die on the rocks." She looked down at her cracked and shaking hands. "And if you had stood up and defended me tonight, then you would have decided what I was too. A thing worth protecting. And that is kinder than what Drake did. Far kinder. But it is still someone else deciding." The hearth popped, somewhere far across the hall. "I needed to be the one to say it," she whispered. "Just once, just one time in my whole life. I needed to be the one who decided. And here is the thing about that night. There was no kiss in it, no falling into his arms, no heat, the way the old songs would have arranged it, no bond flaring gold between them in the dark. The deepest intimacy of Wren Ashby's whole life, up to that point, was this: a barefoot girl and an ancient king sitting side by side on a cold stone floor in the gray hour before the dawn, not touching, a sleeping boy breathing easy between them and the whole rest of the world. Two people simply letting each other be exactly what they were. That is a thing the songs almost never tell you. That sometimes the most intimate moment between two people is not the first time their hands touch. It is the first time one of them truly sees the other and does not look away and does not reach to fix it and does not move to take it and simply says, with their whole quiet presence there in the dark, "I see you, and you are enough. And that was you. Not me. You. That is not heat. That is something rarer. And it lasts a great deal longer." When the not quite dawn had brightened the silver in the walls, Wren rose at last on legs that did not much want to hold her, and she swayed, and Cain was there in an instant, one great hand at her elbow, the other hovering, not quite touching, asking. She looked up at him, at the weathered, ageless face, at the silver eyes that had waited 112 dawns, and were, even now, even after all of it, still waiting, for her to choose, for her to reach. "You can carry me," she said, "if you want to." It was not surrender. It was a gift, freely given, by a woman who had finally, that long night, learned the difference between being taken and choosing to be held. Cain Thorne gathered her up against his chest, as though she were something precious and breakable both at once. And as he carried her from the great hall, 200 lichens rose in silence to their feet, not for their king, for her. The trouble came up out of the south 3 days later. It came the way trouble usually does, not with an army, with a rumor. A scout returned to the hollow with his ears flat and his report worse than any wound. The lowland packs were stirring, all of them, stirring the way still water stirs when something very large moves beneath it. And the word they were passing, hall to hall, fire to fire, was this: a monster had come up out of the old mountain. A monster had stolen a daughter of Black Ridge, and the monster was coming for them all next. Cain heard it out in silence. Then he laughed. Once, short and humorless, like a stone dropped down a well. "Cora," he said. Wren, sitting by the hearth in the chamber that had become hers, looked up. "You sound certain." "I am." He paced the length of the firelight, vast and restless. "Drake does not have the cleverness for it. Drake is a fist. He pushes. He takes. He has never in his life understood that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a fist." Cain stopped. His silver eyes found her. "It is a story told to the right ears at the right hour." Wren went very still. Because she knew that, didn't she? She had lived inside one of Cora's stories for 7 years. The story where Wren was the strange one, the cold one, the one who whispered with rogues and poisoned cups. Cora never threw the first punch. She arranged it so that someone else did. And then she stood back, wide-eyed, with her hands clean, and let the pack do her violence for her. "She is doing it again," Wren said slowly. "To all of them this time." Maeve came that evening with a tray, and the particular kind of news that does not travel by official channels. Maeve was old, even by the measure of the old blood. She had hands like a grandmother and a sword on her hip the length of Wren's arm, and she had appointed herself, without anyone's permission, the keeper of the new queen, who was not yet a queen. She set the tray down. She did not leave. "The lowland packs are frightened," Maeve said. "Frightened packs do stupid things, and there is one telling them exactly which stupid thing to do. She held Ren's eyes. Your sister has been busy, child. She sends riders. She sends gifts. She tells Wachala's story shaped to its own old fear. To the ones who hate the old blood, she says the lichens are waking to conquer. To the ones who fear Blackridge, she says, join us or be next. And it is working, Ren said. It was not a question. It is working, Maeve agreed. Within the moon, the hollow could be standing against a dozen packs at once, over a lie, over you. That was the moment the dilemma arrived, fully formed, sitting in Ren's chest like a swallowed stone, because there was a clean way to end it. Everyone in that mountain knew what it was. No one had said it aloud, but it hung in the air of every council, in the set of every jaw. Kill Drake, kill Cora, quickly and visibly, and soon. Cut off the head, and the story dies with the mouth that tells it. The lowland packs would scatter the moment the source of their fear went silent. It was the oldest answer there was. It was, Ren understood, with a cold clarity, almost certainly the right answer, if you measured rightness in lives saved. Cain could do it in a single night. He had told her so himself, not cruelly, only honestly, the way he told her everything. Give me the word. And by the next dark, there is no Drake. There is no Cora. There is no war. Only quiet. And the terrible thing was, part of her wanted it. Let us be honest about that part. Because the story would be a lie if it pretended Ren was a saint. She was not. A piece of her, a real and human piece, wanted Drake Vale to feel the rocks she had been promised. Wanted Cora to know, in her last moment, that her cleverness had finally run out. Wanted the simple animal satisfaction of watching the people who threw her away be thrown away in turn. That wanting was not wrong. This matters, so it is worth slowing down for. The wish for revenge is not a moral failing. It is what a healthy creature feels when it has been harmed. A person who has been hurt the way Ren was hurt, and feels nothing at all, has not transcended the harm. They have only buried it, and it will come back wearing a different face. Ren felt the wanting fully. She did not pretend it away. She did not scold herself for it. She simply sat with it, and then asked it a question that revenge can never answer for itself. If I do this, who do I become? She found Cain in the armory. He was running a cloth along the length of an old blade, slow, and he did not look up, but his shoulders shifted, the way they always did when she came near, like something in him turned toward her without being told. If you kill them, Ren said, the war ends. It does, and the lowland packs go home. Most of them, yes. She stood in the doorway a long moment, turning it over. Then I am not going to ask you to, she said. The cloth stopped moving. Cain set the blade down. He turned to face her, and there was no anger in him, only a deep and weary patience. The patience of a creature who has watched a great deal of history and seen how most of it ends. Ren, he said, I will give you anything. You know this. But I need you to understand what you are choosing. If we do not cut the head from this, we fight the body. And the body is a dozen packs. The old blood is strong, but strong is not the same as untouched. Some of mine will die. Bram, who you saved, may die. In a war started by your sister's mouth. It was not a threat. It was the truth, laid bare, because he respected her enough not to soften it. and it nearly broke her resolve. Because that was the cruelest part of the dilemma, wasn't it? The clean and bloody answer would save lives. The slow and merciful one might cost them. Wren stood in the cold armory and felt the full weight of it. And then she said the thing she had come to say. "If you killed Drake in the dark," she said slowly, "then Cora's story comes true. The monster came up out of the mountain. The monster took the girl. The monster killed the alpha in his bed. Every frightened pack in the lowlands will believe her forever. You will not have ended her story, Cain. You will have finished it for her." Cain went very still. "And if you kill Cora," Wren went on, her voice steadying as she found the shape of it, "you make her a martyr. The clever girl, silenced by the beast. They will sing about her. They will believe every word she ever whispered, precisely because she is not alive to be doubted." She stepped into the armory, onto the cold stone. "The only thing that kills a lie," she said, "is not a sword. It is the truth, spoken out loud, in front of the people who believed the lie, while the liar is still standing there to be looked at." There is a thing here worth carrying out of the story, and it is true in worlds with no lichens in them at all. An abuser does not fear your anger. They are fluent in anger. They have been managing other people's rage their whole lives. Scream at them, and they know exactly what to do. They make themselves the victim of your screaming. They point at your raised voice and say, see how unstable. See how dangerous. Your fury is fuel to them. What an abuser cannot survive is clarity. Calm, plain, public clarity. The quiet recitation of what was actually done in front of witnesses, with no performance to twist and no rage to redirect. That is not revenge. That is testimony. And testimony, delivered without heat, in the daylight, before the very people who looked away, is the one thing a liar has no defense against, because it leaves nothing to reinterpret. It just stands there, true. Wren did not understand the word testimony, but she understood in her bones that she had been silenced once already, on a cliff, with the whole pack watching, and she would not let the silencing be the end of the story. "So here is what I want," she said. And she laid it out, and Cain listened, and the council listened when it was called. And a strange thing happened in that hall of ancient warriors. They did not argue her down. She wanted to go to Blackridge, openly, in the light of the full moon, when the whole pack would be gathered. She wanted Cain beside her, and a small number of his old blood at her back, enough to make the truth safe to speak, but not so many that it became an invasion. She did not want a slaughter. She wanted an audience. She wanted to stand in front of the 100 faces that had watched her fall, and the sister who had worn her mother's chain, and the man who had called her a placeholder. And she wanted to say, plainly, in her own steady voice, exactly what had been done to her. And then she wanted to let the pack decide. "That is a great risk," Oren said. He had come to the council. He sat at the edge of it now, watching her with those steel eyes that no longer held contempt, only a hard and careful weighing. "You put yourself in the open, among people who tried to kill you. On the word of a girl who will do anything to keep her story alive. She may have a knife waiting. She likely does." "She does," Wren agreed. "Cora always has a knife waiting. That is what makes her Cora." "Then why?" Wren looked at the old lichen for a long moment. Because if I hide down here, she said, and let Cain do the killing for me, then I am still the girl on the cliff, still the one things happen to, still small. She shook her head slowly. I did not survive that fall to spend the rest of my life being kept safe in the dark. I survived it to stand up, in the light, where they can all see that I did. The hall was silent, and then Oren, very slowly, inclined his head, the same grudging tilt he had given her over a dying boy. Then the old blood will stand behind you, he said, not in front, behind, as you have asked. The preparing took 3 days. Maeve braided Wren's hair back, close and tight, her grandmother's hands gentle on a scalp that had been torn just days before. She dressed her in dark leathers cut to fit, and a cloak of black wolf fur lined in gray silk, and boots that someone in the hollow had stayed up 3 nights making, because Wren's feet, after all this time, deserved at last to be measured exactly. And on Wren's wrist, Maeve fastened a thin band of black iron, a promise mark, the old woman said. Not a binding, not a chain. He wants you to know you can take it off whenever you wish. A faint, dry smile. And he wants the whole world to know what it means, that you have not. Wren looked down at the iron band. She thought about the silver chain, still wrapped in cloth in her chamber. Her mother's chain. She had not decided yet what she would do with it, but the thought of it sat in her, patient, like a card not yet played. She did not take the iron band off. The night before they rode, Cain found her at the mouth of the small grotto, the same grotto where a knife had touched her throat, where she had knelt in the snow and said, I do not know how to be wanted. The snow was thinner now. Spring was somewhere down the mountain, thinking about climbing up. You are afraid, he said, not a question. Yes, good. He came to stand beside her, looking out at the dark trees. Only fools ride toward a knife without fear. Fear is the thing that keeps you sharp. A pause. But I want you to hear something, before tomorrow. She turned. If, when you stand before them, Cain said, your voice fails, if the old fear takes your throat and you cannot say the words, if you look out at those 100 faces and become, for one moment, the girl on the cliff again. His silver eyes held hers. Then I will be 1 step behind you. And there is no shame in it. Standing up does not mean standing alone. It only means it is your feet under you, and your voice in your mouth, and your choice in the air. I am not there to speak for you. I am there so that you are safe enough to speak for yourself. Wren looked up at the enormous, ancient, patient creature who had caught her out of the sky, and for the first time she understood the whole difference between him and Drake. Not the size, not the silver eyes, not the bond. Drake had made her small so that he could feel large. Cain made her safe so that she could become large herself. Tell me her name, he said gently, as they turned back toward the warm dark. Your wolf. You have been carrying her toward something these 3 days. I can feel it. Not yet, Wren said, but she was smiling, just slightly, when she said it. Soon. After. When it is done. She wrapped her fingers around the iron band on her wrist. I want to name her on the other side of this, as someone who stood up, not as someone still waiting to. Cain nodded, and asked nothing more. And far down the mountain, in a hall ringed with old oaks, Beneath a moon swelling slowly toward full, Cora was telling one more story to one more frightened hall, never once dreaming that the dead girl was about to walk back into the light and tell a better one. They came for Black Ridge on the night of the full moon. Wren rode at Kane's side, not behind him, not carried, beside. She sat a small dark mare with eyes like wet river stones, and the black wolf fur cloak hung from her shoulders, and the iron promise mark was cold against her wrist. Her mother's silver chain was wrapped in cloth and tucked against her heart, where she could feel it with every beat of the mare's hooves. Kane had brought 12 of the old blood with him, only 12. More than 12 would be discourteous, he had said, with that small, dry humor she was learning to listen for. And it would make it look like war. This is not a war. This is a woman going home to say a thing. The 12 rode in silence behind them, ageless, enormous, unhurried, and the moonlight caught the silver in their eyes and the bone rings in their ears, and they looked like something out of the very cradle songs that had once been used to frighten the people they were riding toward. The Black Ridge Hall sat in a clearing ringed by old oaks. Wren had not seen it from the outside in 7 years, only from the inside, scrubbing its floors, mending its torn cloaks, sleeping curled small in its cold, damp corners. It looked smaller than she remembered, smaller and meaner and sadder, as though the cliff that morning had been the last interesting thing it would ever do. The horns went up as they approached. She heard the panic in them, the high cracked notes of sentries who had expected nothing tonight, and now saw 12 of the old blood walking out of the tree line under the full moon, with a dead girl riding at their head. The pack spilled out of the hall. 100 faces, the same 100 faces. They came out armed and frightened, and they faltered, all of them, when they saw what had come. And Drake stepped out last. He wore his white furs again. Cora was on his arm in another pale gown, and her hand was at her throat, where the silver chain was no longer. She had felt the loss of it. Wren could see it, even from across the clearing, in the way her sister's fingers kept moving up to her bare collarbone and finding only skin. Drake's eyes found Wren in the moonlight, and his face did a strange and terrible thing. It went through disbelief, then fury, then, last and fastest, the thing Wren knew best of all, the calculation, the look of a man who has always been able to talk his way out of every consequence he ever earned. Wren, he said, and he made his voice warm. He was good at that. He had had years of practice. Wren, beloved, we thought you dead. We held the right in grief. There has been some terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Drake. Wren did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The clearing had gone so still that her quiet words carried out across it like a bell rung once in cold air. You stood at the cliff, she said, and you told me I was a placeholder. You told me Cora was your fated mate. You said it close, quiet, so only I would hear it, because you wanted me to carry those words down with me when I died. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that, distantly, her hands were perfectly still on the reins. Her wolf was calm inside her, the deep calm of a creature that has finally been fed. And then you pushed me, she said, and 100 wolves who had eaten my bread and worn the cloaks my hands mended. and slept easy because I sat up nursing their sick. Watched you do it. And not one of them said a single word. She let that hang in the moonlight. So let us not start with beloved. Watch what is happening here, because it is the whole turn of the story, and it is so quiet you could miss it. Wren is not screaming at Drake. She is not weeping. She is not begging him to admit the truth, or pleading him toward an apology he will never give. She is doing the one thing he cannot survive. She is calmly, in front of witnesses, simply describing what he did. She is handing the facts back to the very people who watched them happen and then chose to forget. Plain, unadorned, no rage for him to point at, no tears for him to dismiss as hysteria. Just the truth, standing in the clearing, refusing to leave. And Drake's warm face begins to crack, just at the edges. This is sorcery, Drake said, louder now, turning, pivoting, throwing his voice out over the watching pack. Look at her. Look. She has been ensorcelled. She rides with monsters. Out of the old mountain, the very monsters Cora warned you all of. She is not Wren anymore. She is bait. She is the beast's lure, sent to draw you out so the old blood can fall on us in the dark. It was a good story. It used their oldest fear. It explained away the impossible thing standing in front of them, a girl they had killed, alive and clean and calm. It gave them permission to lift their weapons. And for one held breath, Wren felt it work. Felt the pack lean toward it. Felt 100 hands tighten on 100 hafts. This was Cora's design. She could see it now. The whole shape of it. Cora had not needed to be here with a knife. Cora had only needed Drake to say the words, and the frightened pack to do the rest. Alpha Drake Vale of Black Ridge. Cain had not raised his voice either. He did not have to. The whole clearing flinched at the sound of it, low and even and rolling, like the first far thunder before a storm that has already decided to break. He swung down off his great black horse, slowly, and the slowness was its own kind of threat. The slowness of a thing that has all the time in the world and is choosing, for the moment, not to use it. His boots hit the frozen earth. He did not draw a weapon. He walked unhurried until he stood between Wren's mare and Drake Vale, and the Black Ridge Alpha was suddenly a very young man in very white furs, and Cain Thorne was a very old thing in very plain black. "You pushed my mate off a cliff," Cain said, conversational, almost mild. Drake opened his mouth, closed it. "You sent 3 men to her throat at dawn." Drake's hand drifted slow toward his sword. "Don't," Cain said, soft as falling snow. "Don't. I am being polite, Drake Vale, because she asked me to be. She asked me last night not to kill you." Cain let those words settle over the clearing. "She asked me to let your own pack see you, to let them choose. I have been a king a very long time, and I have rarely been asked for mercy by the one soul in the world who has earned the right to revenge. I find I cannot refuse her." His silver eyes were terrible. "So I will not gut you in your own yard tonight. You may thank her for that later, when you have learned how." Then he turned, slowly, to face the gathered pack. The warriors, the women, the old ones leaning on staves, the children peering out from the dark doorway of the hall. The same 100 faces that had stood at the cliff's edge that morning and watched and said nothing. "You're Alpha," Cain said, and his voice rolled out over them like weather. and the woman on his arm conspired to murder a daughter of your own hall on a false charge of witchcraft. A sound moved through the pack. The proof, Cain went on, rides at my side and breathes. He let them look at her. At Ren, sitting straight on the dark mare, alive, calm, whole. The Hollow does not rule packs, Cain said. The Hollow does not want your lands, or your tithes, or your loyalty. The Hollow has come for one thing only, to set the truth back down in front of you, and then to leave you alone with it. His silver gaze swept them. So, Black Ridge, the old blood is asking, what do you do with an alpha who throws innocent women off cliffs to please his lover? Silence, a long, taut, terrible silence in which the moon climbed a little higher and the old oaks creaked in the cold, and 100 wolves looked at the ground and at each other and at the calm, alive girl who should have been bones at the bottom of a cliff. And then, from the very back of the crowd, someone moved. An old warrior, stooped, gray, the same old fighter whose festering wound Ren had sat beside for 3 nights running, humming low so he could sleep. He stepped forward. He looked at Ren. He looked at Drake. He looked at the silver eyes of the Lycan King and at the empty place at Korra's throat where the chain had been. And then, slowly, with great effort, he turned his back on his alpha, one by one, and then, in a slow ripple that took perhaps a full minute and felt like an age, the Black Ridge pack turned their backs on Drake Vale. It moved through them like wind through wheat, the same wind that had moved through them at the cliff, only turned now, reversed. And here is a thing the story owes you, plainly, even in this moment that is meant to feel like triumph. Do not make saints of the Black Ridge pack too quickly. These are the same wolves who stood at that cliff and said nothing. They are turning their backs on Drake now, not because they have suddenly discovered courage in their chests, but because the power in the clearing has shifted. The old warrior who moved first, perhaps he acted from real shame, from a debt remembered. But the rest follow because following is the thing they have always done. They followed Drake to the cliff. Now they follow each other away from him. This is the uncomfortable truth about justice done in public. It is so often indistinguishable from cowardice, simply changing which way it faces. Ren knew this. That is exactly why she felt no triumph as she watched it happen. Not because Drake no longer mattered, but because she understood at last that the pack's loyalty had never been hers to win or lose. It had never truly been Drake's either. It had never belonged to anyone. It only ever belonged to whoever was winning. Korra understood last. When she did, she let go of Drake's arm as though it had burned her and stepped sideways, away from him, putting clean air between her pale gown and the man the pack had just abandoned, and Ren saw it. The small, hideous, lightning-fast calculation saw Korra begin to arrange her lovely face into the look she had worn her whole life. The look of the victim, the frightened girl, the one who was only ever swept along by forces larger than herself. It had always worked before. It did not work now. I was forced, Korra said, and her voice trembled exactly the right amount, pitched to carry, pitched to wound. He made me. Drake made me say those things. He made me wear the chain. I was as much his prisoner as Ren ever was. I swear it. I swear. Cora. Ren said her sister's name softly and reached into her cloak and drew out the bundle of cloth and unwrapped it slowly so the whole clearing could see, and lifted into the moonlight the thin silver chain with the small moon at the end of it. You gave this, Ren said, to a man named Reeve, as payment, to bring you proof that I was dead. You pressed our mother's chain into the hand of my killer and called it a wage. She let the moon catch the silver. He had it at my throat 3 mornings ago in a grotto on the old mountain. He told me, with his own mouth, exactly what you had promised him for it. Bring her proof the witch was dead, and the chain was his to keep. So no, Cora. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. You were not forced. You were paid. You were the one doing the paying. The chain swung, gently, glittering in the cold air between them, and there was nothing. Nothing at all. That Cora could say to that. Her clever mouth opened and closed, and for the first time in the whole of Ren's memory, Cora had no story. Drake Vale stood alone in his white furs in the center of the clearing, the pack at his back. Cora a careful step away from him, abandoned in turn by the only person she had ever truly served, which was herself. The old blood silent at the tree line. The moon high and cold and white over all of it. And Ren Ashby looked down at him from the back of her dark mare and felt at long last the thing she had never once been allowed to feel in his presence. Nothing. She felt nothing for him at all. Not hatred, not grief. Not the old terrible pull of wanting him to love her after all. The cord that had bound her to him for 7 years, the cord he had spent those years tightening and loosening to keep her always reaching. It was simply gone, cut, not by her rage, by her clarity. He was not a monster anymore. He was just a small, cruel, frightened man, standing alone in furs too white for him, in a clearing where no one would meet his eyes. There is no feeling in the world quite like it. The day you finally look at the person who broke you and discover that they have become ordinary, small, survivable. The day the spell breaks, not because they apologized, not because they changed, not because you finally got your revenge, but because you grew larger than the place they had folded you into. That is the real ending of an abuser's power, not their punishment, your indifference. The moment you can look at them and feel the great roaring nothing where the fear used to live. Take them, Ren said quietly, to Cain. Both of them, for the Hollow's questions. That is all. She did not ask for their deaths. She did not ask for their suffering. She did not climb down off the mare to spit in Drake's face, or tear the empty look off Cora's, or take a single thing for herself out of the long ruin of those 7 years. She only said, take them. And that is all, because she was finished with them. Truly, completely finished. In the way you can only ever be finished with someone when you no longer need anything from them, not even their suffering. Cain Thorne inclined his great dark head. My queen, he said, and he meant it now in a way he had not quite been able to mean it before. Not because of the bond, not because of the cliff, or the catching, or the silver in his eyes, but because he had just watched her become one, in front of everyone, with her own steady voice. The 12 of the old blood moved, and it was over so quietly that the pack barely understood it had happened. No slaughter, no screaming. Just Drake Vale and Cora taken, bound, lifted up, while 100 wolves watched the way they had watched everything, and said, the way they always said, nothing. Wren turned her mare toward the tree line. She did not look back at the hall where she had slept curled small for 7 cold years. She did not look back at the cliff. She did not look back at Cora's silenced face or Drake's white furs. She looked forward, up the mountain, toward the warm dark, toward the hollow, and the sleeping boy she had saved, and the 200 ancient warriors who had risen to their feet for her, and the band of black iron on her wrist that she had not taken off, and clutched in her hand, warm now from her own grip, her mother's silver chain. She had it back, and she knew, at last, exactly what she was going to do with it. They brought her back beneath the mountain, and this time she did not flee. That, more than anything else, was how she knew she had changed. The first night in this place, she had climbed all those black stairs in the dark to escape the warmth, because warmth had only ever meant a trap, because gentleness had always been the soft thing laid down just before the snare. Now she rode down into it willingly, her mother's chain held warm in her fist, her wolf quiet and standing inside her chest, and not one single part of her looking for the door. The hollow received them in silence, but it was a different silence than the one that had met her the first night. That first silence had been the wary, weighing stillness of 200 ancient predators studying a stranger who had been dropped, bleeding, into the heart of their home. This silence was something else entirely. This one felt like a held breath, like a whole court waiting to see what their queen would do, now that she had gone out into the world and come back having become one. But the queen did not go to the throne room. She did not climb the dais. She did not call the council. She did not stand on the worn black stone and let them lay anything at her feet. She went first to a sleeping boy. Bram was awake when she found him, sitting up against the wall of the chamber where she had fought for his life through one long, terrible night. The gray was gone from his face. The wound at his side had closed clean and pink beneath the fresh honey and the clean linen. He tried to rise when he saw her. She pressed him gently back down, one hand flat on his shoulder, and he let her. That small thing, a lichen warrior of the old blood, letting a human girl push him back into his bed, said more than any crown the court could ever have set on her head. "They are saying," Bram murmured, "that you faced down all of Blackridge with nothing but your voice, that you did not even draw a blade." "I have never been any good with blades," Wren said. "No." The boy looked up at her, and there was something close to awe sitting in his ancient young eyes. "You did the harder thing." Wren did not answer that, but she stayed with him a while, the way she always did, because the work of a healer does not end the moment the wound knits closed. It ends when the wounded one believes, all the way down, that they are truly going to live. And that, she had learned long ago, in a colder hall, takes far longer to mend than the body ever does. Spring came late to the mountain that year, but it came up the slopes, one slow green inch at a time, melting the last gray crust of the winter, until the trees outside the grotto began to bud, and the air turned soft, and began to carry the smell of wet earth and pine sap, and that particular sweetness of a whole world deciding, all over again, to live. And on one such morning, Wren stood at the mouth of the grotto, the same grotto where a knife had been pressed to her throat, the same grotto where she had knelt in the snow and wept, because she did not know how to be wanted, and did not believe she would ever learn. Her feet were bare against the cold spring stone. They did not hurt. They had not hurt in weeks. She stood and watched the first green push its way up through the last of the melting snow, and behind her, soft on the stone, came the footsteps she would have known anywhere, in pitch dark, by feel alone. "You are supposed to be in council," she said, without turning around. "I left Orin in charge of it," said Canethorn. "He enjoys it far more than I do. I suspect he is plotting, even as we speak, to replace me entirely. Orin would make a terrifying king. He would. The lowland packs would surrender on sight and save us all a great deal of trouble." His arms came around her from behind, slow, asking the way they always asked, and she leaned back into the warmth of him without thinking, without bracing, without that old reflexive flinch that had taken so many long weeks to finally fade out of her body. He made a low sound, deep in his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. It was the sound she had come to understand over the winter of a very old creature who was still, even now, after everything, quietly astonished every single time she chose to touch him on purpose. She turned in his arms. She had to tilt her head a long way back to look up into his face. He was still enormous. She was still small. None of that had changed, and none of it ever would. But the gap between them no longer felt like a cliff. It felt instead like the difference between a hearth and a cold hand held out toward the warmth of it. "I have been thinking," Wren said. "A dangerous habit," he murmured. "I encourage it entirely." "About my wolf." His silver eyes sharpened, gentle and very attentive all at once. He had learned, over the long winter, to recognize the particular quiet she fell into whenever she was working her way up towards something that truly mattered. He had learned to go still for it, to make room, to wait without filling the silence with himself, the way Drake had always filled every silence with himself. "She never had a name," Wren said slowly. "In all 7 years at Black Ridge, no one ever once asked me what it was. And a wolf without a name is a wolf who is not quite real." She paused. "And that," she said, and her voice caught, just slightly. "That was the whole point of it, I think. They wanted her to not be real, because if she was not real, then it would not count. What they did to me. You cannot truly break a thing that was never there to begin with." Her hand rose, without her permission, to rest flat against the center of her own chest. "But she was real the whole time," Wren said. "She was the one who recognized you when I was falling. She knew, before my frightened mind would let me know it. She was with me through every cold year of it, starved, nameless, forgotten, and still, she never once left me." Cain's great hand came up and covered hers against her sternum. His palm was warm and broad enough to cover her whole hand, and through the layers of him she could feel her own heartbeat, steady now, where once it had only ever raced or hidden. "What is her name?" he asked softly. "Little Moon, tell me her name." "Sable," Wren said. The word came out steady, certain, a thing already decided in the quiet dark before the dawn. "Her name is Sable. I named her this morning, before the light came up over the ridge. A breath. I wanted you to be the first one I told." Something moved across the Lichen King's weathered face then. Something that, on a smaller man, on a lesser creature, would have been tears. He did not weep. Things as old and as deep as Cane Thorne do not weep easily, if they remember how to weep at all. But he bent his head until his forehead came to rest gently against her own. And they stood like that, the two of them, for a long quiet moment, in the mouth of the grotto, with the spring wind moving soft and warm around them, and the larks beginning, somewhere up the ridge, to find their voices again. "Sable," he said, testing the shape of it on his tongue, holding it carefully. The way you hold a thing that has only just been placed into your keeping. Sable. It suits her. It suits the one who knew me before either of us understood. Now, here is the thing worth carrying out of all of this. So listen closely. Because the fur and the silver eyes and the 1,000-year-old mountain have been hiding it in plain sight this entire time. The naming is not really about wolves. It never was. It is about the moment. And if you have been lucky, even just once in the whole course of your life, then you have had a moment like it yourself. The moment when someone you love trusts you enough to show you the part of themselves they have never shown to anyone. The fragile part. The unnamed part. The part that got locked away long ago, in some cold and frightened year, because the world once punished them, badly, for daring to have it at all. Wren named her wolf Sable. And then she did the most dangerous thing a person who has been hurt can ever do. She handed that name to someone who could have used it against her. She gave the most fragile, hidden, hard-won truth of herself to a man who, if he had been a different sort of man, could have wielded it exactly the way Drake had wielded every soft thing she ever offered him. And Cane Thorne held it like it was made of glass. That is not a supernatural bond. Let no one tell you otherwise. That is intimacy. The real thing. The terrifying, ordinary, deeply human kind. The kind that is available to anyone at all, in any world, with no old blood in their veins whatsoever, who is simply brave enough to look at one trusted soul and say, out loud, "This is who I am," when no one is watching, when no one is performing. This is the real and frightened name of me. And then to wait, heart open, to see whether it is held or broken. "Now tell me yours," Wren said. Cane drew back, just enough to look down into her face. "Your wolf," she said. "You know mine now. You have known mine for the length of a heartbeat. It is only fair." Cane Thorne was very still for a long moment, and then he smiled. The small, private smile she had only ever seen him give to her. The one that softened all the old weather out of his ancient face, and made him look, for just an instant, almost impossibly young. "Ash," he said. "His name is Ash." A pause. "He has been waiting for Sable," Cane said quietly, "for longer than there have been names for the years. Longer than your pack has had its haul. Longer than that cliff has worn its face. He woke the day she was born, somewhere far away, in a girl who did not yet know she carried him, and he has not slept easy a single night since." His thumb stroked, very lightly, across the back of her hand. "Ash and Sable," he said. "They knew each other long before we did. All this time, they have only been waiting, patiently, for the two of us to finally catch up to them." Wren made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else. Something with no name at all. something that had been locked up in her chest for 7 years and had only just now found the door standing open. She rose up onto her toes, bare feet on the cold spring stone, and she pressed her mouth to his for the very first time. He kissed her back the way a man drinks after a long, killing thirst. Carefully, reverently, as though he could not quite let himself believe the cup in his hands was real, as though holding it even a little too tightly might cause the whole impossible thing to dissolve back into the dream he had half convinced himself it was. When they finally broke apart, the spring wind moved through the grotto, and somewhere far below, in the heart of the hollow, a horn sounded. Not a war horn, not an alarm. The long, low, joyful note that the old blood kept for the marking of glad things. Maeve, Wren strongly suspected, had been listening at the bottom of the stair. Maeve always seemed, somehow, to be listening at the bottom of the stair. "Come on," Wren whispered against the lichen king's mouth. "Take me home. Take me down. There is a court waiting down there to meet their queen. Properly, this time. With her name, and with mine." And Cane Thorn lifted her up into his arms, not because she could not walk. She could. Her feet did not hurt anymore. But because he wanted to. And because she let him. And because between those two simple and freely chosen things, there was no longer any cliff left at all. Now, let us be honest. Before this story draws to its close, the way it has tried to be honest with you, the whole long way through. This is a story. There are no lichens. There is no mate bond humming away beneath anyone's ribs. There is no enormous ancient king waiting in the snow at the foot of a cliff to catch a girl who has been thrown away by the people who should have kept her. The mountain is a metaphor. The chain is a metaphor. The cliff is a metaphor. The fall and the catching and the long climb home into the warm, all of it metaphor. Because in the real world, beyond the page, beyond the firelight and the silver eyes, no one heals from 7 years of being made small in a single dramatic gesture on a moonlit night. Wren putting her mother's chain around a king's throat is not the end of her recovery. It is a declaration of intent, nothing more and nothing less. A line drawn in her own hand that says, "From here, I choose differently." The actual healing, the real work of it, is quieter than that, and uglier, and far, far less cinematic than anything you have heard tonight. It is the mornings she will still flinch at a heavy footstep in the hall. Out of an old animal habit her body has not yet had time to unlearn. It is the nights she will wake crying and not be able to explain to the man beside her exactly why. It is the slow, graceless, deeply unglamorous work of teaching herself, one ordinary, unremarkable day after another, that she is allowed to take up space, that she is allowed to want things, that she is allowed to say no in a small voice, and have the world simply accept it and move on without punishment. Stories give us the big moments, the cliff, the catching, the naming, the kiss in the spring grotto. But life, the real thing, asks us to survive the small ones, the 1,000 quiet ones strung out across the years in between. And there is no horn that sounds for those, no court that rises to its feet, no king who lifts you into his arms. There is only you, choosing, again, in the gray, ordinary morning, to believe the thing you are still learning to believe, that you are worth the keeping. But the thing inside Ren is real. That is the part worth carrying out of the story, when all the fur and the fantasy have fallen away and left only what is true underneath. The starved, unnamed, locked away creature that recognized safety before her frightened conscious mind would ever let her accept it. The thing that knew, even on the way down the cliff, with the wind tearing the scream from her throat, that something good was waiting at the bottom of the fall. Even when every single lesson her life had ever taught her was screaming the exact opposite. You may call it intuition. You may call it self-worth. You may call it the small, stubborn, unkillable voice that lives at the very bottom of a person, the one that goes on whispering you deserve better than this, quietly, faithfully, even when everything and everyone around you has spent years insisting that you do not. Whatever name you decide to give it, it is real and it is yours. And it was always, always yours. And no one, not a lover, not a family, not a whole pack of 100 familiar faces who watched you fall and chose to study the snow instead, has the right to make you forget its name. A year passed, and then another after it, and the hollow, which had stood in secret beneath the mountain for the better part of 1,000 years, began slowly and carefully, the way a very old creature stretches out a long folded limb that has not moved in an age, to come up at last into the light. It was Ren's idea, Sable's idea, really. The wolf inside her had grown bold over the seasons, and curious, and full of strong opinions. She did not much care for the dark all the time anymore. So Cain built a hall above the grotto, half stone and half timber, with great south-facing windows of leaded glass that caught the morning sun and threw it warm across the floor, and a hearth wide enough to roast an entire ox. And Ren filled that hall, with herbs hung drying in fragrant bunches from the rafters, with great lazy dogs asleep beneath the long table, with the comings and goings of healers learning their craft, and eventually with the small, soft, utterly impossible sound of a child laughing. His name was Rune. He had his father's molten silver eyes, and his mother's small, careful, slow-to-trust smile. And Maeve, who had long ago appointed herself grandmother to the entire hollow, whether anyone liked it or not, declared him, with great solemnity, the single most dangerous creature ever to wear a woolen sock. Blackridge endured under new and gentler leadership. The old warrior who had been the first to turn his back on Drake now led them, and he led them carefully, like a man who knows in his bones that he is paying off a debt he can never quite finish paying, and intends to spend the rest of his life trying anyway. He sent the pack's young healers up the mountain to learn their craft at Ren's side. He sent the pack's children up to play with Rune. In the very grotto where the boy's mother had once knelt, alone, weeping in the snow, certain that no good thing in all the world was meant for her. And the children played there, and laughed there, and the place where she had broken became, in time, the place where the next ones learned that they did not have to. That is its own kind of healing, too. Maybe the deepest kind there is. To take the spot where you were hurt the worst and fill it on purpose with the sound of someone else being safe. Drake and Cora answered the Hollow's questions. What became of them after that is not really a part of this story. It never was. Because this story was never truly about them. They were only ever the cliff. The thing Ren had to fall from in order to find out what was waiting at the bottom. And a cliff, once you have landed and risen and walked away on your own 2 feet, is not a thing worth turning around to look at. It is just rock, cold and indifferent, and behind you now. It does not deserve another moment of the life you fought so hard to keep. The silver chain stayed at Canethorn's throat. Ren had put it there herself, the very night they returned beneath the mountain, not around her own neck, where it had hung for so many years like a small bright weight of grief, around his, where the whole court could see it, where they could all understand exactly what it meant. Because a chain, she had decided, somewhere on that long ride home through the moonlight, was not a thing you wore to prove that you belonged to someone. It was a thing you gave, freely, with your own 2 hands, to prove that you had chosen. And the thin band of black iron stayed at Ren's wrist, the promise mark, not a binding, a thing she could have slipped off any day she wished. Neither of them was ever taken off. Not once, not ever. On the morning of Rune's 3rd spring, Ren stood once more at the mouth of the grotto and watched the larks come back to the mountain. She felt her son's small, warm hand curled trustingly inside her own. She felt her mate's great hand resting, light and certain, at the small of her back, not holding her there, not steering, just present, exactly the way it had been on that first impossible night in the great hall, when he had let her step away from his touch and walk forward alone and choose in front of everyone for herself. And she understood at last, fully, completely, in the way a thing can only ever truly be understood after it has been survived, and not merely escaped. She understood that her mother had been right all along. The old blood remembers you, little one. When they throw you away, look down. Her mother had not been telling her about lichens, or kings, or any creature waiting in the snow. Her mother had been telling her about this, about the looking down, about the refusal to keep your eyes shut on the way to the ground, about the strange, stubborn, world-changing courage it takes to believe that something good might be waiting at the bottom of the worst fall of your life. Even when every voice you have ever known is telling you there is only rock. The old blood had come. It had been waiting all along. It had only been waiting for her to open her eyes and look. And here the story comes to rest. Beneath the singing larks of the hollow, a girl who was thrown off a cliff by the very man who had sworn to love her was caught by a king who had been waiting for her since before her grandmothers ever drew their first breath. She walked out of warmth once because she did not know how to be wanted. And then she walked back into it because she chose slowly and bravely and against everything she had ever been taught to learn how. She stood up in the full light of the moon in front of all the people who had watched her fall, and she said the true thing in her own steady voice, and she did not need a single one of them to clap for her, or forgive her, or take it back. She had stopped needing anything from them at all. That was the victory, not the king, not the crown, not the court rising to its feet, the nothing. The great, clean, roaring nothing she had felt at last, looking down at the man who broke her. And in the end, she took her mother's silver chain, the one that had been a promise, and then a trophy, and then a wage paid for murder. And she put it around the throat of the one who had chosen her, instead of around her own, because love, the real kind, the kind that is worth surviving the long fall for, is never, ever a leash. It is a hand, held out, open and unhurried, across the cold, and the quiet, stubborn, world-changing courage it takes to finally stop bracing for the blow and reach for it. Good night.